Hey, welcome to this Q&A. Please, if you have any questions, go ahead and start putting them in the comments section. Help me see that there are questions there by putting some question marks before and after your question. That will just help me as I'm my own pilot, my own co-pilot tonight, going in solo. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I can, and I decided to do this to mention a sale that we're currently running on the Audio University membership, which something I'm very, very excited about in regards to our membership is that we've just completed the Mixing Essentials course, which I guess is over on this side. So you can scan that QR code or use the link in the description below the video to check that out. There's special pricing. It ends tonight at midnight Eastern time. So check it out. If you're looking to improve your mixing skills, start mixing, or even polish your mixing skills, if you're more advanced, we've had students of all different levels give us really, really good feedback on this. The whole premise behind the Audio University membership is that it's not just people flexing their credits. It's people who are actually professionals, not only in mixing for clients, but also professional teachers at universities and training facilities around the country and the world. So one of our first instructors is Gabe Herman. He teaches the Mixing Essentials course. He talks about EQ, compression, delay, reverb, in depth. He has theoretical ideas about each of these things in addition to practical demonstrations. And then the second half, or maybe even the second 2/3 of the course, is Gabe walking through a mix step by step, explaining his mindset as he goes through each step in the process for drums, bass, acoustic guitar, vocals, background vocals. He does vocal tuning, and you're basically alongside him there as he does all these things. And that's kind of what you'd expect from a traditional course, but what we're trying to do here in this one in particular, which is the reason I'm so proud of it, is we're trying to make it as close to the in-person learning experience as possible. So I went to a 4-year university. I know a lot of people who go to colleges for audio programs, and those are great and they have a lot of benefits, but it's not accessible for everybody. So what we're trying to do is use modern technology to make professors that teach in real audio programs accessible to people who can't maybe afford to move or pay tuition at one of these really awesome programs, such as the one that Professor Herman teaches at the University of Hartford. So yeah, check that out. Once you enroll in the course, you not only get the course materials, but you'll also be an Audio University member, which means if you have questions along the way, you can just mention Gabe Herman, the instructor, and he'll be there to help you out and give you, maybe a different way of thinking about a particular concept. And I'll tell you more about this as we go. I don't want to just make this a big commercial. So let's see if we've got any good questions in here. And yeah, I'll give the sales pitch a break. I see one of our first questions was, can you help me out? I'm struggling with gain levels. Should I use your ear or bring the level to the balance with a signal meter, or really an SPL meter, I'm assuming is what he's saying. Here's a little bit more clarity from the same user. Yeah, I mean, it's really up to the way you like to do it. If you have an SPL meter, that's definitely going to give you a more objective measurement. You can use A weighting or C weighting would probably be preferred. And what C weighting is going to do with an SPL meter is it will try to approximate the way humans hear. And if you're trying to make sure the left speaker is the same level as the right speaker, you could do that by ear, but it's probably better to use a meter and just get the same reading coming from each speaker. That's especially true if you're trying to match one pair of studio monitors to another. Now, if you're in a live sound scenario and you're trying to get a grasp of the appropriate levels, I would recommend having an SPL meter out, just because part of your job as the front of house engineer is to make sure you're protecting the audience's ears and you're not making things too loud. So yeah, use an objective meter when you want an objective measurement, but in almost all things in audio, use your ears and learn to trust your ears as a subjective measurement, if that makes sense. So while I wouldn't maybe recommend using a meter for making the end all be all mixing decisions, I could suggest using a meter to measure more objective things like SPL or sound pressure level. Thanks for all the tutorials and lessons. Question I wanted to ask was to see the budget is not an issue for you. So what made you stick to Reaper over the other DAWs? Yeah, I have free licenses to Pro Tools and Cubase and other DAWs, and I use them to try to see what's possible in each one. And what I found is the basic tasks that you really need are possible in all of them, even if it's a different pathway to get to each setting and each software. And the reason I use Reaper is because anybody in the audience can download Reaper and install it and trial it for free. And if they want to get the personal license, I think it costs $60 for a perpetual license. So it's just really accessible. There are benefits in workflow that some people swear by this DAW or that other one, but for me, it's just helpful for people to be able to see what I do in my videos, download that same software themselves, and repeat it on their own. So yeah, that's why I choose Reaper. Dorian says, did the audio interface affect the way the microphone sounds? You're welcome. She said, or he says, thank you for all the info you've posted here. So does the audio interface affect how the microphone sounds? Not as much as a lot of other variables. So the microphone itself will affect how the sound comes through. The position of the microphone will have a huge effect on how the sound comes through. As long as you're using a pretty basic XLR cable from the microphone to the interface, that shouldn't have much of an impact, except for maybe some noise if it's a really cheap cable. But basic cables tend to do an okay job. And then you get to the audio interface. And so what things could change the sound would be the quality of the components, including the preamp, the microphone preamp, and the A to D converter, the analog to digital converter. The analog to digital converter and even the least expensive audio interfaces these days are remarkably good. So good that I am not confident I could listen to the cheapest audio interface and a really nice audio interface and identify which one is which based on the converters alone. I don't think I have the capability to do that personally. And I think I have a pretty good ear. So what I'm saying is that while it might be possible to identify them, it's a very subtle difference with modern technology. The microphone preamp could have a bigger difference. Now, I use RME interfaces in my YouTube creation studio, and they aim to be as transparent as possible. Low noise, low harmonic distortion. They try to capture the signal as it is coming in from the microphone, just louder. Some microphone preamps intentionally try to add some harmonic distortion, which can be heard as warmth or a little bit of vibe. That's the case with these Cranborn Audio Camden 500 preamps. There's actually a knob that takes them from completely as pure as possible, and then you turn this mojo on and it starts adding in some harmonic distortion. I think generally speaking, most preamps are going to fall into the earlier camp. Usually you'd get a really vibey preamp as a standalone preamp so that you could use it when you want to. But when you're doing just everyday things, I tend to go for the transparent one that you'd find in most interfaces. So really, the audio interface could impact the sound in subtle ways, But I think what's much, much more impactful is learning where to place a microphone and how to place an instrument in a room and these sorts of things. How to make sure you're not clipping the input of the audio interface. So really the skills are what are going to impact the sound the most. And the gear has some impacts, but the audio interface among all the other pieces of gear has pretty subtle impact in my opinion. Good question. All right, so how do I sidechain something to make it hit only when something hits a certain frequency or volume? I wish I had my DAW open for this. It could be helpful to explain. What I will do though is I'm going to share this here. So a sidechain compressor, for example, you might have one compressor here. You've got the source and its input signal, and then the output comes out of the output, obviously. Under normal circumstances, this compressor would be triggered when the source signal went past a certain point called the threshold, right? So if you set the threshold of the compressor, when the source signal goes past a certain point, it will trigger the compressor, which will change the output. With a sidechain, and I guess I'll call that SC because S is already taken, you could have a key input. So now the signal being processed is still the input signal here. But now it's not when the input signal goes over the threshold. It's when the key input goes over the threshold. It will affect the input signal. So I think you already knew that because you used the word sidechain. Let me go back to this question here. Yeah, here we go. The question is, how do you sidechain something to make it hit only when something hits a certain frequency or volume? Some compressor plugins, some other plugins that have sidechain will give you an option to use band limiting for the key input. So let's say you've got this right here, which is 20 to 20 kilohertz. You could maybe put in a low pass or high pass filter here and a low pass filter here, so that now you're only using these frequencies within to signal or to trigger the threshold. So that could help if maybe there's a lot of low end in this key input and you don't want the low end triggering everything. You really want that transient that happens around 2 kilohertz to trigger the threshold of the compressor. Sometimes the compressor will have a key input shaping module. Now you could also put that in yourself if you took the key to some sort of band limiting EQ or something and then took that in as the key input to the compressor. So sometimes it's integrated, but I could imagine a way where if it wasn't integrated, you could probably make that happen just using what you know about audio. If you're just joining us, we're just going through some questions. We're answering random questions about audio and just hanging out. This is in a way to promote the sale that we've got going on till the end of the day today at midnight. The Mixing Essentials course is available for a lower price until midnight, and then it goes back up. Not only will you get access to the course, though, you'll get access to our membership, which if you'd allow me to show you real quick, I'm pretty proud of it. So we've got, first off, our courses, right? So it's a course library. You can think about it like that. And if we dig into the Mixing Essentials course in particular, it's extremely, extremely helpful. Gabe Herman taught it. He's been teaching audio production for over 20 years. He's been mixing for clients for over 25 years. What he does is he goes through the theoretical elements of EQ and compression and delay and reverb. So that makes up these first 4 modules. And as you can see, there are plenty of lessons in each one of those. These include not only theoretical, but also some demos to help you understand the concepts. But then once you've gone through that first half of the course, he goes back to square one and opens up a multi-track session that you can actually download the tracks and work alongside him. It's really, really thorough. As you can see, he starts with setting up the session with drums. He goes through bass, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, preparing vocals. He's currently working on tuning vocals. And each week we continue to add to that in the members only section of this membership community. Now, what makes the membership community a lot more useful than just the course is that you can ask questions in the comments here, or in the live chat, or in this community section down here. You're not only asking for feedback from other members, but Gabe Herman and myself are in the chat also. So if you stumble upon something in the course, you can ask for clarification from the course instructor himself. I think that's pretty powerful. And then we have some live events here. For example, you can submit your mixes to get reviewed, and past mixes are here to watch on the replay. If you're not able to join live, that's fine. You could just submit a mix, it'll be reviewed, and then you can watch yours by opening this up and playing the video. And we also have office hours each month where it's myself and Gabe Herman on live for a Q&A. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. The sale ends tonight again at midnight, but let's get to some more questions. All right. Oh, it says the audio is way too soft. Nice catch. Let's see what we can do about that. So since this is an audio channel, I'll open this up and we'll go over here to my mixer. And it looks like I'm coming in about, pretty low here. So I'm just going to take the gain up a bit. 1, 2, check. So that should be a lot better for you. Thank you very much for that comment. And hopefully that sounds better. Let's see. Here's a good question. Can we really mix professionally without studio monitors, just using headphones? Yeah, I mean, I know people who do it, especially with these new softwares like, Slate Digital has something, and SonarWorks has something, and Sony has a virtual mix environment. And the idea being that when you put on headphones, there's a difference in what you hear versus what you would hear with the same mix coming out of studio monitors. That's a fact. These software are trying to implement the HRTF, the head-related transfer function, what your head does to the sound in a room that makes it sound so different from headphones. And yeah, you could use those software, but I think even if you decide you can't afford that software, you can mix in headphones for sure. I think it's just important to be aware of the things that are different. For example, like the stereo image with headphones. If you pan something hard to the left, it's going to only come out of the left side, which appears to be 90 degrees to your left. Whereas if there are speakers in front of you, like I have right here in front of me, if I pan something hard to the left, it's really about 30 degrees or so, I guess, off axis. I think that's right. It's either 30 or 60. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'd have to watch my own video on that topic. But what I wanted to tell you is it's important to be aware of these sorts of details. And I made a whole video on that topic. If you just search mixing with headphones versus studio monitors, it should come up. And if it doesn't, maybe just type in Audio University after that, and that should help you find it. Good question, though. I do think, as you'll see in that video, it helps to have both. It does. But I understand choosing not to go with studio monitors at first, because studio monitors are really only as good as the room they're in. So you can see I've had the opportunity to put up acoustic treatment on my walls and ceilings, and that allows my studio monitors to perform at a much higher standard level. So if you're unable to do that, it may make sense to just go with headphones for the time being. Yeah, great question. That's something a lot of people ask. This is an interesting question here. PCM versus DSD. So PCM is pulse code modulation, and DSD is direct stream digital, I believe. Yeah, I mean it's different, and whether it's better, I guess what you're asking is, can someone discern the difference between PCM and DSD? I'm not sure. There haven't been that many double-blind studies where people have been able to identify really anything higher than 16-bit PCM with 16-bit depth. Of course, we record with 24-bit depth usually for production reasons, mainly. But then if you consider PCM as a series of samples relative to usually a fixed point, DSD is much different. It has a much higher sample rate. And if I remember correctly from school, it has sort of a floating reference point to the previous samples. So it's an entirely different technology. It's something that you often don't get an opportunity to hear because you'll need a special converter and playback engine to be able to experience DSD. So I don't know, let us know in the comments what you think if you've ever had the opportunity to test them side by side. So hopefully the audio is better. Let me know in the comments if it's still quiet, but I see more comments in here saying it's quiet. Hopefully that was before I fixed it. Here's a good question. Do you give a diploma or certificate after the course? It's not an accredited university or anything. I have to be really careful with that because the name of my business and YouTube channel is Audio University. So this is, I hope it's clear, but it's not an accredited university. So you definitely will not get a bachelor's degree or a Bachelor of Arts or anything like that. We're not doing certificates right now just because usually when I receive a certificate for something like that, I'm like, that is what it is. Like I've got my diplomas up here and I'm very proud to hang those, but sometimes you get certificates and you're like, what does this really represent? What I'm more interested in is creating an environment with the community and with the course, with that QR code on the screen. I'm more interested in creating an environment where you can learn and not be alone in your learning, right? So you'll actually have support rather than just watching endless YouTube videos and trying to somehow have more videos and information just make you better. We want to take you to the next level and be able to consume information, ask questions about it, put it into practice with practice exercises, submit those practice exercises for review by somebody who really knows what they're talking about, and then repeat that process. And I think that that's the value I got from going to a 4-year university. And that's just what I'm trying to bring to the internet, because I understand not everybody has the time to dedicate to a full-time student program. Charlie, thank you. Love the videos. Keep it up. I appreciate that. Best budget line array that can work in most environments. I haven't tried many budget line arrays. Usually when I'm thinking about budget, I'm usually thinking more about just point source speakers that are going to be powered speakers usually. And the line arrays I leave for the not budget ones, the ones that are really high end and dialed in to accomplish specific objectives. Like a line array can help you put sound in one place without having it spill too far in other directions. Or it can help you direct sound to a unique audience area. But if I'm on a budget, usually those things are the least of my concerns, and I'm just trying to get sound to the people who need to hear it. And a point source powered speaker is a really good option for that. This is an interesting comment. I was confused with the difference between compression and dynamic range. Yeah, they're related things, but they're not the same. So let's say you've got an audio signal that's dynamic range is this much. You've got the loudest parts here, and then you've got the quietest part here. So maybe there's a drum hit, and that gets really loud, and then it decays to just a very quiet reverb. So the dynamic range could be this much. If you were to compress that dynamic range, you would do so by using a compressor to turn down the loudest parts. And then usually what you do is use makeup gain on the compressor to turn everything back up. So now you've got a louder thing where that reverb tail is much louder as well, because you've turned down the loudest parts and turned everything back up. So you've compressed the dynamic range by basically making the dynamic range not as dynamic. Keep in mind, though, compressors do more than just compress dynamic range. They also, they also create harmonic distortion. So anytime you're going to dynamically change a wave, you're going to create harmonic distortion, which can be good. That's why some compressors sound warm or colorful. Just something to be aware of. I think that's something that often gets overlooked, but learning from Professor Herman in the Mixing Essentials course, I actually learned to appreciate that a lot more. He tends to teach compression from the adding warmth and color side, and then to the controlling dynamic range, where I think a lot of people, especially on the internet, are just talking about the controlling the dynamic range without really getting into why and how it controls harmonic character. So, yeah. All right, let's see. We got another question here. The question's probably in between playing, recording, and mixing. As a guitar player, I have the sound that inspires me, but it doesn't always mix well. What is the priority here? It's a good question. Sometimes your tone live will need to sound a lot different than your tone on a record. And I think it really is just situational. Think about it. A microphone can be right up next to a guitar amp. And in a live situation where you're just hearing yourself at a rehearsal or something, you're hearing your amp from quite a distance, and you're hearing a lot of the room in that sound as well. So by the time your guitar amp tone gets to you, it's not just your guitar amp tone anymore. It's your guitar amp tone plus all this other stuff. Now when you put a microphone right up next to the guitar amp, it is more so just the guitar amp tone, but now you're in much closer proximity to the amp, and that changes the sound in a lot of ways. So I think really what should be the priority is what does the mix call for. If you're on stage and you need to hear yourself from your guitar amp, maybe just make it sound good to you, and then trust the sound guy to make it sound good for the audience. And those two sounds may be different. If you're making a record and you're trying to replicate your sound, don't be afraid to pull the microphone away from the guitar, or maybe put a mic up close to it and then use a room mic to try to get some of those other elements that you think of as your tone because you've always listened to it from a distance. So yeah, that's what I would say. Just your tone. I'm a guitarist too, as you can see. My tone is not with my ear up next to the cabinet. So that means that if I wanted to replicate my tone, I'm going to have to do something maybe a little bit different than just putting a microphone up next to a cabinet. Really good question there. I like that. Why don't your mixes sound open like the pros? That's a timeless question. I would say probably because just the pros have been practicing longer. And so their mixes didn't always sound as good as they do today. So there's something to be said about continuously learning. If you want to learn how to mix, that's exactly what we do in our course, Mixing Essentials. So check that out. But in any case, there's a lot of free information on YouTube. You can consume information and it helps. But again, just like in our membership, you need to put the information into practice. So whether you're a member and you have downloadable practice exercises, or you're not a member and you just want to use your own projects, please don't forget to practice, because the professionals practiced. There was a lot less information back then. So I think what a lot of the pros today who are older did was they practiced more than they consumed information. And now I feel like people do the opposite. And I feel somewhat to blame on that, but I'm trying to fix it. That's why I'm trying to add in that other element of learning to make up for just, creating more and more content on YouTube over these years. All right, just looking through these questions here. Let's see. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to add clarity to a mix? There are lots of tips and tricks on how to add clarity to a mix in the Mixing Essentials course. There are different ways to do it with EQ, with compression, with delay, and with reverb. You can add clarity with considerations of all of these things. One way that I might suggest here in this live stream would be to consider the fact that psychoacoustically, like what we perceive, lower frequencies will tend to mask higher frequencies. So if you're lacking clarity in the high mid range or the high range, for example, the first instinct would be to go boosting there or go doing something there. But really, there's a chance that the high frequencies are being masked by lower frequencies or low mid frequencies. So a lot of the time, a problem that you hear in the higher range is due to a cause in the lower range. So maybe if you cut some of the muddy frequencies out with an EQ, that would allow some of those high frequencies that are already there to shine through without being masked as much. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, thank you everybody for the love and these comments. I'm just reading through them. A great comment here. Awesome content. Thank you everyone who's taking the time to say that in the comments. It keeps me going. I'm serious. Sometimes you just want to quit, but reading these comments and hearing how people are actually getting value feels really cool. Okay, here's a good question. What's a DI box, and what does it really do, and is it needed for recording guitar? I would urge you to just search Audio University DI box, and I answer those questions. I talk about what it is. It's a tool used to convert between an instrument level high impedance source and a mic level low impedance input. And the verdict on do you need one for recording guitar really comes down to, does your interface offer an instrument input? Because if it offers an instrument input, it's kind of got a DI box built in. It's already optimized to receive signal from like a passive pickup or an active pickup on a guitar. Whereas if you have an interface that doesn't have an instrument input, I would highly recommend you use a DI box. And if you have a mixer that they often don't have instrument inputs, I would recommend using a DI box. So anytime you have to plug an instrument, like a pickup, into a mic input, use a DI box for sure. Thank you again. Those who are just saying thank you, who are taking the time to say thank you, I appreciate it. I appreciate you. What are the top 3 pieces of advice for mixing a performance live? Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good video. I need to remember this. So the first one I would say is, do not assume you have to amplify everything. All right. So for example, if you're mixing in a small club and there are walls, the room is 50 by 50 feet, the drums are probably going to be loud enough. Okay, maybe the kick drum will need a little bit of amplification, but the cymbals definitely, almost certainly won't need amplification because they're loud enough in the room already. So when you're mixing in the studio, you have to put everything in the mix if you want it to be heard. But in live, the thing exists in the room already. So remember that, and there's no need to necessarily add cymbals when the cymbals are already loud enough, and that will help you get your vocals where they need to go. So many times the vocals can't be heard because there's unnecessary amplification of other things. So that's my second piece of advice would be, start with the vocals. In my opinion, you get the vocals as loud as they really can be in a lot of cases without feeding back or distorting the system. And then you build the mix around the vocal, because people want to hear the vocal in most cases. Third piece of advice for mixing live performances, I'd say just make sure that your system is set up properly from the beginning. So whether that means having speakers in front of microphones, whether it means ringing out your stage monitors beforehand, or tuning the system, or if you have subs and tops, aligning those two things in time. This gets more advanced as you go higher up with higher end systems, but if you start with a system that's not really performing well, your mix will never sound good on that because it's fighting against itself. It's best to start by tuning the system and then you mix into it, and you'll have a lot better results. Good question. You made me think on my toes there. Okay. Reading through these questions. Does this one say? Beginner here. With vocals, and especially female vocals in live settings, you're having difficulties with 1, adjusting high frequencies, and 2, adjusting the compression. Any tips? So when you say you're having difficulties, I might imagine you're getting some feedback, because if you try boosting high frequencies too much in live sound, that could cause feedback really quickly. What I'd recommend in that case is, if you're having problems with high frequencies, maybe think about how low frequencies might be causing those problems. Because like I just said a few minutes ago, lower frequencies tend to mask upward. Lower frequencies tend to mask higher frequencies. So maybe think, if I cut the low, mid, and the boom that comes from the mic being very close to the vocalist and so on, maybe that will create clarity in the high frequencies without even having to touch anything up there. And then adjusting the compression, I can also imagine, could lead to some feedback, especially if you're boosting high frequencies going into that compression. In studio, you can compress to your heart's desire, and the worst thing that will happen is it will create a lot of distortion or pumping or something. But feedback can occur in live sound. So if you crush the dynamic range and bring everything back up with makeup gain, you're just adding more gain, which you only have a certain amount of gain before feedback will occur. With compression, it's really just difficult to give you advice on female vocal compression without hearing it. It's really a case-by-case thing. So maybe think about the EQ stuff, and then, if you're interested, the Mixing Essentials course, just in case it wasn't clear, it's for both studio and live techniques. It's mainly recorded music just so we can show it. It's difficult to demonstrate a live mix, but the principles you learn will apply to live mixing. So if you want to learn more, you can use that QR code over here. And again, I don't want it to be just, sorry, I can't help you unless you join our course. So John, you can find a lot of tips for mixing female vocals with compressors. And I would just recommend trying to learn how a compressor works, what the controls do, and just practice. Even if you don't practice live, if you practice with tracks in your DAW, that'll still help when it comes to doing those live mixes. All right, what is this question here? I don't have the budget for multiple DIs, so can I use a Behringer DI box instead of BSS or Radial Pro? And what's the difference? Yeah, you can totally do that. It'll sound pretty good. The difference with the Radial for me is that it's made out of really robust materials, and those things can go on tour for just years and years and still hold up. They've got really thoughtfully made transformers and shielding around the thing, so like noise and tone will be affected somewhat, but it's by no means a situation where you can't use the Behringer DI. any DI that's available, you can probably get pretty good results with it. And then as you start to hear some of those problems, maybe that's when you decide to go with one of the higher end options. But there's no harm in starting with an entry level option. It definitely won't ruin the recording. Just going through some of these questions. Some of my specific product recommendations, that's not so much my thing. I'm more I love talking about the concepts behind all of these things. So it's not like I've gone and tested every microphone or every in-ear system. So I don't feel like I can really speak on that as much as I can on some of these more technical questions. So if I skip over your question, I apologize. But I'm going to focus in on what I think I do best, which is just those technical how to sound work questions. How do you get a stereo mix for live stream with 2 aux sends on an analog mixer with the ability to get something to the left and right? Now, you're either using an analog mixer that has a built-in audio interface. In that case, it's kind of a toss-up as to how you get those things to work, or if you can. But if you're just using an interface like I'm using here, the RME UCX2, you can see that down here, analog 1 and 2, this is my outputs. I can send things like my microphone to this mix. And you can see when my microphone meters bounce, this meter bounces. And then I just press loop back, and that sends the signal here back in. And it's stereo. So I could go all the way to the left, and now you're probably only hearing me out of the left side, or all the way to the right, and now you're probably only hearing me through the right side or right down the center. Not all interfaces can do that. If you have an analog interface if you have an analog mixer and you take aux 1 out to input 1 of an audio interface, and then aux 2 out to input 2 of an audio interface, usually if there isn't a mixing software, I shouldn't say usually, but sometimes it'll treat that as left and right. I prefer to get an interface that has a virtual mixing software, but those tend to cost more money. And it's just, that's why, because those features are really useful, especially if you're doing live streaming. So yeah, I would recommend, if you're using Windows, it's different because you can usually select separate input pairs. With Mac, you're usually stuck with what you've got. But the basic way to do it would be to have a mixer that sends aux out 1 into input 1 of an interface and aux out 2 into input 2, and that will probably be left, right. Now on the mixer itself, you won't have a pan knob necessarily between aux 1 and aux 2. So in that case, you're kind of just using different blends of aux 1 and aux 2. If on one channel aux 1 and aux 2 are equal, it will appear to come from the center, both equal in the left and right speaker. If you only send it to aux 1, then it would only come out of the left speaker, and so on. You can sort of blend the amplitude difference between those two things, or the level difference between the two, and that will approximate panning. Again, that's more complicated than just using the main outputs of the mixer into input 1 and 2 of an interface, and now the pan knob on the mixer does what it's intended to do. All right, what other questions do we have in here? All right, while we're looking for another question, I just want to mention quickly that the Audio University membership it's going really well. We have over 260 members now, and you can join using this QR code over here to get a special price that ends tonight at midnight Eastern time. It's a discounted price for the year, and there's also a quarterly pricing option, which you might find interesting. And what you'll get inside the membership is access to our library of courses. Now, all of these courses are taught by not only professionals in the industry, but professional educators as well. So we've got over here Gabe Herman. He teaches at the University of Hartford. We've got Paul Willie Green Momack. He's taught at a few different schools. I think Fort Wayne, Indiana. I always get those confused. I think he's at Fort Wayne, Indiana right now. His headquarters is over in New York, Brooklyn. Mixing Essentials is taught by Gabe. The Acoustic Panel Blueprint and EQ with Your Ears are taught by me. And just the feedback we were getting is a lot of memberships have people just who have really great creds, and they're really good at what they do, but they're not so good at teaching what they do. And these people are both good at what they do, and they're good at teaching at what they do. And Gabe is available in the membership. So, you can just mention Gabe in a comment should you run into any information that you need some clarity on. And then to take that a step further, we've got practice exercises that you can download, and then you can submit them to be reviewed by Gabe Herman or another expert instructor. So now, instead of just consuming YouTube videos and trying your best for you to consume information, discuss that information with your peers and with the instructor themselves, and then practice applying that information and get feedback on how well you implemented that information, right? The 4 pillars that I feel are essential for learning are theory, practice, feedback, and community. And that's what we're trying to encapsulate in what we do in our membership. All right, back to some questions. Should we master in 192 kilohertz? That's a sample rate for those who don't know. A CD, for example, would be 44.1 kilohertz. Most music that you listen to, I shouldn't say that. Lossless music can be a variety of sample rates, but for me, I've done a lot of research on this, and I made a video that included, it was called, what was it? Digital Audio Q&A, I think is what they call it. It was Monty, right? You might have seen the Monty video, but I kind of want to pull that up real quick because this is a good video, and I would recommend checking it out. If you've asked yourself, should we use this sample rate or that sample rate or this bit depth or the other? I'm going to search Audio University bit depth, and we'll see if it comes up. Yes, it does. So right down here, we've got part 1, debunking the digital audio myth, the truth about the stair-step effect. And then we've got this one here, why higher bit depth and sample rates matter in music production. The gist of it is for playback, it's hard to prove that 16-bit depth and 48 kilohertz are insufficient, or not even, you may even say it's difficult to prove that it's discernible to go beyond that for playback. However, for the production process, there are a lot of reasons why you might want to stick with higher sample rates and bit depths. And for mastering, you're kind of getting toward the end of the chain, but if you intend to do dynamic range compression, I would recommend working in the highest one you can, and then ultimately people probably won't consume it in that high of a sample rate and bit depth, but at least you'll know that you are able to work with the finest set of information that represents that waveform. That'll help with dynamic range on the bit depth side, and that'll help with frequency range and anti-aliasing on the sample rate side. Again, if you want more information on that, check out those videos. reading these comments. I'm still here with you. Thank you for joining. I hope that this has been useful. Quick shout out to everybody in the comments who has left a comment just expressing appreciation. Really appreciate that. Ooh, we've got a super chat. Nice. Thank you. $5. I appreciate that, Kevin. Having trouble with clipping and ugly audio using iPhones for choir backing track into a digital mixer. Should I use a DAC or an interface after the iPhone? The iPhone's microphone, it can be remarkably good for some applications. I'm not sure this is one of them. And particularly the voice memo app, if that's what you're using, it tends to compress things. So that might sound like clipping when really it's just heavy harmonic distortion that is effectively clipping. So you may want to try getting an app that's made for recording without doing that compression. There are many available. Ideally, you would use an interface with microphones. I mean, even if you're using pretty inexpensive microphones, like condenser mics, I think you'd get better results here, because then you're just recording what's coming from the mic without all of this like unknowable processing that the iPhone probably does. If you need to use the iPhone, I'm not sure how you would get its microphones into an interface. So to answer that question, I don't think you could use an interface with an iPhone. But yeah, maybe even using an iPhone microphone that plugs into the iPhone rather than relying on the built-in microphones. But of course, it's very convenient to use an iPhone. So maybe you start with that, searching for a recording app other than voice memo that will allow you to record it not without audio compression, without dynamic range compression. Yeah, thanks for the super chat, Kevin. Hopefully that answer was helpful for you. You've got the Go XLR and the Shure SM7B combo. Not a fan of the compression and EQ settings. Do you have recommendations on preamps? The SM7B is going to need a lot of preamp gain. It's got a really low sensitivity, meaning a given SPL that goes into the mic yields a relatively low voltage or output from the mic on the electric side. So unless you have a pretty loud source, you're usually going to need to add a lot of gain. And in that case, like I was saying earlier, you know, RME preamps and this Cranborn Audio preamp, they have really transparent, they are really transparent. And then the Cranborn one in particular, you can flip a switch to make it not transparent. It will actively try to create harmonic distortion. So it really depends. Do I recommend a preamp? I like the Cranborn one that I've been using. I like the ones that are built into my RME. I like a lot of the ones that are built into a Focusrite 2i2, a pretty inexpensive interface when using the SM7B, if the source is loud enough to where I don't need to max out those preamps. But I think it just really comes down to what you're trying to do. Do you want clean or do you want colorful? If you want colorful, what kind of color do you want? And that's a whole rabbit hole. And if you want clean, it's just about choosing one that's going to be clean. I mean, one of the, like a Grace preamp is really well known for that. But if you're trying to work within a budget, maybe you just take a look on Sweetwater and look for preamps that boast low harmonic distortion and high transparency. So hopefully that helps. It's one of those things where it's so impossible to give advice on the best preamp for that mic, because there's so many different things you could do with that mic. What's the best way to have centralized control over mic processing across all apps in the system? Keeping the DAW open and route it there. You could do that. That would cause a lot of latency. What I like doing is using my interfaces virtual mixing software. I use RME Interfaces, and their virtual mixing software is free with the interface. It's called Total Mix. I like using this. I have many different mixes down here, and I can send different things to those mixes. Right now, I'm creating a mix on this 1 and 2, and I'm using Loopback to send it to you so you can hear me. And I could do that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more times with stereo mixes on each of those. So that's amazing. Now, limitation, if you are streaming, might be if you're using Mac, for example, Restream only gives me the option to choose 1 and 2. It doesn't give me 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and all of these different options. On a Windows computer, those are options, and I could send 1 and 2 to YouTube, and I could send 3 and 4 to Restream, and I could send 5 and 6 to OBS, and so on. But in Windows, it's kind of limiting. I don't think that's a problem with the driver itself. It's from what I've heard from much smarter people than me, is it's kind of just a feature of the Mac operating system. So anyway, I think using the virtual mix software of your interface is the best way to go. They don't all have that, but that's something I highly recommend looking into before locking down on an interface. Just reading through these questions. Sorry to go silent on you. I'm here solo, answering questions for the Audio University YouTube audience, who helped me make a living out of teaching what I love, audio. And to take that a step further, I'm going to continue creating free content on YouTube. Don't worry about that. But in the membership, where you'll find the Mixing Essentials course, it's on sale, by the way, until midnight tonight. So act quickly if this sounds interesting. Beyond YouTube, what we're trying to do is make a learning experience that is bi-directional. So you're not only consuming content, but you can consume content and then get in live sessions with the instructors or ask questions in a forum and get answers to your questions and then actually put those things into practice. So if these things sound interesting to you, please join our membership with special pricing today. Hey, someone scanned the QR code. Nice. Looking forward to meeting you in the membership. I've got a live office hours coming up, I think next week or the week after. We've got a mix review next week where we're going to review 3 members' mixes. And as a member, you could submit your mix to be reviewed by an expert. In this case, it's going to be Professor Gabe Herman, the teacher of Mixing Essentials. And then on the following week, we're going to have a live session that we call office hours, which is just people from our membership show up and they ask questions about either the content in the courses that are in the membership library, or they ask questions about a project they're working on, or, it's really just a hangout and Q&A session. So I'll be there, Gabe will be there live, and I hope to see you there. This is an interesting question here, Joseph. Do professional audio engineers mix with surround sound in mind? Surround sound is a very specific thing. Like Dolby Surround was 5.1, left, center, right, rear, left, rear, right, or surround left and surround right, and then a LFE, so 5.1. I made a video on this, so if you search Audio University immersive audio, I think you should find it. And let me just real quick search that here. Audio University immersive audio. Because I've made a few videos on this topic, so let me help you find the right one. This one here, immersive audio and surround sound explained in 5 minutes. So yeah, immersive audio would then introduce the vertical plane or the vertical dimension. So you've got surround, which is just all ear level, and then you've got immersive, which starts to introduce the vertical. And yeah, more engineers every year seem to be thinking, how do I stay up with Dolby Atmos and Sony 360 Reality, ambisonic formats? Yeah, there are professionals who still mix in stereo. Many, probably most professionals and most amateurs still mix in stereo because that's been the industry standard for so long. But I don't know a professional that hasn't at least been talking about it a little bit. Does that mean that to be a professional engineer, you have to have an immersive setup? Today, no. And even if you do need to do an immersive mix, you can try doing it with a binaural rendering with just headphones, which is available with those formats I listed. But maybe in the future it will become more important. I'm just not sure. Reading through some more questions here. I hope everyone's enjoying this. We're just about an hour in, so I'll keep going through a few more questions. Nice. It's great. Not here to ask anything, just here because you enjoy the videos. You want to wish me a lovely day. Man, doesn't get better than that. Thank you. I appreciate that kindness. I appreciate the questions too, though, so keep them coming. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. It's a good question. If you were introducing someone to your work, what tracks would you recommend they listen to in order to understand the difference between a good mix and a bad mix? I would just recommend you train your ears to understand different genres. So if you only want to work in a particular genre, listen to a lot of music in that genre. If you want to be more versatile, listen to music you think sounds good in different genres and listen to music you think sounds bad in different genres. I think it's just listen to a lot of music, and your brain is smart. It's almost like a neural engine or a chat GPT kind of thing. You feed it information, and it may feel like you're not making progress, but your brain is making connections just by being introduced to those things. At least as far as I understand it. I'm definitely not a neuroscientist, but okay. Reading through some comments. Yeah, this is classic. Help, I've got so much trouble with cymbal bleed in my vocal mics. I'm assuming that's in live sound, or maybe even in a one-room recording environment. Bass guitar, drums, and all switch between being the lead vocal. I guess what you're saying is things get loud in the room and they get picked up by the vocal mic. You can impact that by using a directional vocal mic. If it's a cardioid, for example, you could point the back of the microphone toward the cymbals instead of pointing them in the same direction as the cymbals. Of course, on stage, you're not going to have the vocalist face away from the audience. And usually the cymbals are right behind the vocalist, meaning that everything's coming in on axis to that microphone. In that case, distance can help. Or maybe you move the drum kit off to the side somewhere so that it's approaching the mic not directly on axis, really close behind the vocalist, but from an angle as off axis as possible and as far away from the vocalist as possible. And you can even experiment with using like drum shields and things, but of course those cause problems with phase cancellation and and hearing loss for drummers. So yeah, there's costs to everything. Looks like we had another super chat down here, so let me just find that. I want to make sure we give credit where credit is due. Thank you, the plural. It says, does the audio interface sound card matter for mixing and mastering? If yes, please suggest an audio interface sound card. It does matter. One of the first questions we did here in this Q&A was, does it make a difference in sound quality? And it does, definitely. But how extreme is that? Almost always it's very subtle. The difference the preamps and the converters will make are pretty subtle. I think it's a lot more useful to think and set your budget based on not the audio quality, but the features that you'll get with a particular interface. So as I've shown a few times here, this is the mix software that comes with my RME Fireface UCX2 interface. I really like it for what I do, which is content creation. I can very easily do screen captures and live streams, and I can route things and make mix minuses for different guests. And it's just very, very flexible to use this interface in this scenario. Whereas you may use this same interface to create mixes for different people, cue mixes and headphones, right? You can have your inputs here and you can make mixes different for each person. And you just switch between them this way. So I think this virtual mixing software is really, really essential. And then I've made videos on choosing an audio interface. Search, why would you buy a $1,000 interface, Audio University? And I think you'll find a video that will be pretty helpful. But thank you for the super chat on that. And I'll put that to good use, I promise. I'll most likely be investing in more teachers down the line for the Mixing Essentials and for the Audio University membership, I mean. So Mixing Essentials is just one course that's available as an Audio University member. And over time, we're adding to that course library. And each time we add, we're either having a course from myself, Gabe Herman, who's an expert and a great teacher, or some other expert and audio instructor from a college, like for example in Fort Worth or Fort Wayne. I did it again. Yeah, we're getting excellent teachers to make courses, and we're continuing to invest in that. So super chats, they help, and I appreciate you chipping in to make Audio University better. All right, I'll get to a few more questions here. This is a good question. I like this. Josh, how do different plugins affect each other? Like if you have multiple EQs or multiple compressors on a track, do they work independently or do they affect one another? A simple example would be if you had an EQ that cut out every frequency below 100 hertz. And let's say it's a kick drum or a bass track. So if you cut out low frequencies before sending that to a compressor, you're going to need to turn the threshold down in order for it to reach the threshold, because there's less energy now reaching the compressor. Whereas if you turn off that EQ and you just send the raw signal in, there's more energy because you're not cutting it out with the EQ. You could also compress something first and then EQ it after. And both of these things are common techniques. It just depends. So yeah, I would definitely recommend continuing to think the way you're thinking. That's a really good question. How do different components, or how do different plugins in line affect the overall sound? And what happens if I switch one around? This is something I did with before I even started mixing in a DAW. I would rearrange the pedals on my guitar pedal board. So if you put a distortion before or after a compressor, or if you put a volume pedal here or here, or a delay before or after a volume pedal, how can you create different effects? It's a really helpful exercise, and that experimentation is at the foundation of what we do. So yeah, Josh, I encourage you to, in a DAW, you just click and drag, and you can hear the difference. So you can see how the meters change and how everything's working as a system. Here's a good question. I'm currently considering buying a subwoofer to extend my monitoring system's range, but the apartment I'm living in doesn't really allow for acoustic treatment. Can REW or SonarWorks suffice? So REW itself would just measure the performance of the system, and it wouldn't actually fix it. SonarWorks would measure the performance of the system, and then it would attempt to fix it with corrective EQ. Now, there are situations where, for example, this reflection off the wall, if I didn't have acoustic treatment there, the reflection at a certain frequency would maybe create a buildup here. If I just turned that down, well, that's a bad example. Perhaps the reflection causes a dip at a particular frequency. And if I turn that frequency up, it's getting louder in both the direct sound from my speaker and the indirect sound from the speaker to the wall to me. So you're just turning both of those things up the same amount proportionately, and it really doesn't have an effect. So SonarWorks can fix some imbalances, but when it comes to these deep cuts due to reflections, acoustic treatment is really needed. Now, does that mean you have to have an acoustic panel like this? Not necessarily. You could maybe lean a panel up against the wall, and that might help if you're in an apartment and you don't want to put holes in the walls. Alternatively, you can get some results with like a curtain or a towel, but really a thin towel or something like that's not going to do much. And there's a whole video that I've made on acoustic treatment. If you search acoustic treatment doesn't have to be complicated, Audio University, I think you'll find that video very helpful. All right, we're going to do just a few more questions here. So if you're just joining us and you'd like to leave a question, go ahead and do so. One final mention that the Audio University membership is now available at a discounted price, but that price is going to go up tonight at midnight Eastern time. So this QR code over here, you can use that to check out the Mixing Essentials course, which is just a part of the library of courses you get access to as a member. And the Mixing Essentials course is, I'm just so proud of it. If we go in here, we can see that we've got a lot of good completion rates. People are looking through these lessons and they're learning. But when you really look at how much there is, it's kind of incredible. So you got EQ, compression, delay, reverb. Those have theoretical and demonstrations. But then there's a whole part where Professor Herman goes through a mix from beginning to end. Talks about session setup and mixing different instruments, and he talks about tuning vocals with Melodyne. And I'm just so amazed at how much work Gabe has put into this. And it doesn't stop there, because when you have a question on one of these, you can ask here in the comments, and you just do an @mention of Gabe Herman, and the instructor of the course will be there to help you clarify anything that you might be struggling with. Not only that, but then you can go over here and download a practice exercise, a multi-track session, and mix that and submit it here to be reviewed by Professor Herman. So each month we'll do a few mix reviews where different members' mixes will be reviewed, and we can actually get them up on screen with us sometimes. So right now this person joins, and they can ask us questions in real time. And it's amazing. Gabe usually puts some processing on to help you hear what he thinks you could do with the mix. And if that's not enough, you can schedule a private mentoring session. That is an additional cost, just because we can't do that for everybody. But you can get a 60-minute or a 30-minute private mentoring session with me or with Gabe. Again, that's an additional cost beyond the membership. But yeah, the membership itself has these elements of theory in the courses, practice in the practice exercises, feedback where you can turn in your own projects or turn in the practice exercises to an expert who actually give you good feedback so you don't just keep making the same mistakes. And then community. Theory, practice, feedback, and community. The community of people in this membership, you'll be meeting musicians and engineers who work in the industry as well. And for me, almost every opportunity I've had came from the people I met in school. So I think that it's a pretty well-rounded thing. I'm very proud of it. And right now you can join for a discounted price. Okay, let's do maybe one more question. I'm just going to try to find a real good one. How much is the course going for? There are different pricing options available, so I would recommend just clicking the link that's in the description below the video, or clicking or scanning the QR code. That'll take you to the page that'll tell you about what you get as a member, and it shows you the annual, the quarterly, and the yearly pricing. So check that out. And we'll do one more real question, because that one can't count. Come on, we got to have an audio question. Ooh, this is a really good question. I like this. Okay. When recording a band in the studio, when you're recording them all together, all at once, hold on, I got to reread this. When recording a band in the studio, when are you recording them all together at once? And in which situation would you recommend play one after another? Kind of depends on the band, and the style of music and how comfortable they are playing together. Can the drummer play to a click? Personally, I tend to like music that has rhythm that breathes, and it's not just one person's interpretation of the rhythm and then everyone else stacking on top of that. I kind of like when the drummer and the bassist vibe in a way that isn't perfectly on the grid necessarily, but at the same time, it's more groovy because they interact with one another. At the same time, there are benefits to having, for example, everyone play but just recording the drummer, and then layering a bassist on top of that, and then layering guitars and then keyboards on top of that. It's very common to record a full band all together and then record vocals separately on top of that, even if you get a scratch vocal from the beginning. Just something to consider is that when you record things all together at once, if you're in the same room, there's going to be bleed in different microphones. So if you record something all together and then you determine that you need to fix that part, if you play it way different with an overdub, like say the guitar made a mistake and then you go back to play it overdub, even if you mute the guitar track during that section, that guitar mistake may have been picked up by the drum mics or by the bass amp mic and so on. So it's really just very situational. If you like the idea of playing together, then maybe what you do is you try listening to a click track, or the drummer at least listens to a click track, and the whole band plays together, and then you think about what could be layered on top, or are there any parts that need to be redone or augmented. And if you want to prevent that leakage, you could try putting amps in different rooms, so that if the guitar makes a mistake, you can just redo the guitar part, but the drum part will remain clean. It won't have picked up that mistake, if that makes sense. And then again, the vocal is usually always done separately, I think, because it's hard to nail a vocal take just with the band, And it's also, vocal's a very quiet instrument surrounded by a lot of loud instruments. So unless you have a real studio with a vocal booth that's actually doing a great job of sound blocking and isolation, I think recording the vocals separately makes a lot of sense. Hopefully that's helpful. All right. Well, hey, again, check out the course. Offer ends tonight at midnight. And thank you so much for your time. We've got 69 people here. I saw 90 people at one point. That's great. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the appreciation that you expressed. And I hope that you decide to become a member, because that'd give us an opportunity to meet, perhaps in this office hours, the live Q&A that I'll be in with Professor Herman within our membership coming up in 2 weeks. I think it's the 29th. So become a member for the special price, and I look forward to seeing you and hearing your work and helping you